Okay, welcome back to my college sports and more show with Rashad B in the house. And I'm going to be following up on my other video where I talked about the Big 10 Media Days this week. There's also the ACC Media Days going on as well. And then next week, looks like things are going to be starting off with a lot of these teams' training camps and so forth. So I want to just sort of do some quick little takes regarding the Big Ten Media Days, which seems the talking point is about the playoffs and all that other stuff. So I want to jump on that real quick because I was listening briefly to the press conference given by the commissioner of the Big Ten, Tony Batiti, and he was saying, with regard to the format, the number of teams and the AQ qualifiers, that 4+4+ whatever type of thing. And so it was quite interesting. And I also heard a couple of takes from Indiana's coach, Coach Sig, and Ohio State's coach, Ryan Day, and so forth. And so anyway, he was mentioning about the qualifiers and what that might be for college football fans. Now, a reporter had asked him, he said, well, by the polling, the fans want the 5+11 model. What do you have to say about it, basically? And he was like, well, I don't know anything about any exact polling or studies and all this other stuff. And so he thinks differently. And I'm sitting there, well, what if you're wrong, buddy? What if you're wrong? And this is a part of the problem. So he's looking at it from the angle. And of course, again, they're protecting the interests of their league and all that stuff, which is fine. So he's looking at it in the angle of they want the 4 qualifiers out of their conference. Yet, and then he's promoting it with regard to the play-in part. Well, here's something to take note of, Mr. Commissioner of the Big Ten. Your play-in is your conference schedule, okay? That's why the SEC has their schedule the way they have it. And most other conferences have it the way they have it. Because your play-in is your conference schedule. This is one of the things that bugs me. I don't care who you are, all this whining and crying and entitlement stuff at the end of the year about if I coulda, shoulda, woulda, and all this other stuff. Your play-in is your schedule, your conference schedule, more importantly. Okay, we can talk about some of this stuff with the non-conference and stuff in a minute. But as far as conference go, I don't care if it's 8 or 9. You play what you play. If you're good enough to get in your conference title game, there you go. Okay? There you go. And at that point, there needs to be no other play-ins and all this other stuff, because he did make a point that I do agree with in terms of expansion of the playoff from, which obviously is his current 12, and you're talking about like 16 teams. Again, all that does is dilute. All that does is, it's like you said, it's going to be, now you're talking about wrestling over a bunch of 9-3 teams and 8-4 teams and all that other stuff. And where does it end? At any cutoff point, when we had the BCS with the 2, then we went to the 14 model, what has always been the crying argument with that? Well, during the 2, it was the 3rd and 4th team was saying, oh, we deserve a shot. When they went to the 4, it was the 5th and 6th and 7 team was crying about, oh, we should deserve a shot. And now we went to 12, and then you got the 13, 14, 15 teams crying about how they couldn't get in. So it's never ending. Whatever the number, whatever the cutoff is, there's always going to be the left out folks crying. And we see this in basketball, which is why, I for the first time this past season, I didn't even watch the March Madness. Because, again, it might as well just let everybody in and just call it a day. And what's the point of having the season? Why don't you just play the tournament? Forget the season, just play the tournament. and then just have a tournament champion, and that's it. Because this is, and then they're doing this in the point of, oh, for the fans. No, they're not thinking about the fans. Then they talk about, well, TV and money and all that stuff. Yes. So we need to move away from this nonsensical stuff. Let me get my other thing going up here, folks. I need to get to. So we need to get away. Got that moving around. We need to get away from this nonsensical stuff. Hold on a second here, folks. Sorry about that. With regard to this 4+4+ whatever nonsense, and you play your way in by your conference schedule. Now, and it doesn't matter if one team played 8 conference games, the other team played 9. Who is better? You know, if the team that played 8 games is better than the team that played 9 games, it don't matter because the 2 teams play. It'll be settling on the field who's going to be the better team. And for much of what you can look at, you can determine in most cases who is going to be the better team. And even though we've had all of these arguments year in, year out, since we had, as far as college football goes, created this type of playoff model, any kind of model, BCS model, 14 model, 12-team model, the teams that have won the championship, by and large, right? One, they deserve to be in there. They earned their way in there. And the better team won the game, won the championship. So at the end of the day in all this stuff, those are the results. So it doesn't matter if you're going from 4 to 12 to 16. At the end of the day, more times than not, 9 out of 10 times of it, whatever you want to put it, the better team, the best team is going to likely be the national championship. And that means that the favorite team, that means that the team who you can look at throughout the season and can, with your eyeballs, and you got good analysis, can say, okay, that's one of the better teams. And despite when you look at, for example, Ohio State last year, they weren't no pushover. They weren't a team that you just said, oh, but they don't deserve to be in. Because everyone know that they were still a good team, even though they had a mishap and lost that last home game at the regular season to their arch rival, Michigan. But they still were one of the top teams. They wasn't going to not be put in the playoff. Now, if it had been a 4-team playoff, yeah, they didn't play their way out. Because even under the 4-team model, that was their play-in game. That game against Michigan would have been their play-in game because the stakes would have been higher. And so with the 12-team model, which actually, like I said, won me over because I wasn't even for sure if I was liking that when they first announced this stuff. You know, I actually was more for an 8-team playoff than a 12-team model. But after looking at it, and as I've been on the record for many of times, I'm okay with the 12-team model. I think that is the sweet spot because it's enough teams plus it puts the stakes on it right there. If you add 16 teams, the stakes aren't what they are, you know, because again, you're going to be having a bunch of teams that are, like I said, 3 and 4 lost teams up in there. And that's diluted. That's dilution. Not delusional, I was going to say, but that is illusional too. It's diluting the product. Okay, because you have a bunch of games with teams that anybody who knows college football knows, this team. I mean, look at from last year. The teams that was in there Look how the results ended up last year. And again, that comes with some factors. That comes with how well the coaches, the coaching staff prepares their team first and foremost. Irregardless of anything else, how well did those coaches prepare their team? And obviously, some of them didn't, okay? Because they didn't look the same as they had been most of that season. On top of the fact is, when the stakes was at, they didn't show up, okay? And it was almost as if, I won't say they take it for granted, but they just didn't prepare as well as they should have. And the results were the results. And Ohio State was better prepared, and they was ready, and they played like their backs against the wall. That's the way you're supposed to play coming in them playoffs. Your hair on fire. You backs against the wall, you coming out. Notre Dame the same way. And those two teams end up being the national championship. Now, the national championship game didn't turn out to be a classic match that's going to be memorable, that's going to go down in the legions of one of the greatest championship games ever, and so forth. But it doesn't take away the fact that each of those teams earned their way up into the national championship. And all the teams that lost can't cry spilled milk over anything because they had the opportunities. Georgia, Texas, you name the team, Penn State, whatever. So this playoff model, and again, needs to just stay with 5 championship conference winners, and then the rest of the lot is at large, who's the next best teams to be put in there, in my viewpoint, and the viewpoint shared by many other people. Okay. And all this wrestling over the politicking over, okay, this conference playing 8 games, they're playing 9 games. Now, here's the other thing that could sort of, again, not necessarily fix it, but kind of squash down the arguments in it, and that is an agreement between the SEC and the Big 10 to play each other, or just do a round robin of Big 10, ACC, SEC, and Big 12. How about that? Crossovers, because you have 3 non-con games to play, at least. So rotate those. Now, of course, in any given year, somebody's going to get the luck of the draw and pull the worst team out the conference, like Georgia playing Maryland or somebody, something like that. Ohio State playing Stanford, and what have you. But then if unless the powers that be want to fix that, and because obviously they're creating a schedule, so they obviously can see, okay, from the year before, and that's all you're going to base it upon. Okay, the year 4, how are they going to do it year to year? Are they going to do it, years out, and what have you? Because again, in college sports, things change fast. So a team could be 0-11 one year and 12-0 the next year or something, or 1-11 or whatever. With the turnaround of roster, especially with the transfer portal. So, but in any case, if leagues are going up against each other head to head, that gives a better picture to it, as opposed to crying over, well, we playing 8, we playing 9. Let them have their autonomy to their 8-9, but again, you still can put on the schedule these cross conference games. How about that? Settle it on the field. Have these cross-conference games, and so you have some metric to go by, because then you can say, okay, this team played this team. How did that team play that team that played that team? So you got some type of metric that gives it some greater weight than obviously trying to evaluate 2 different schedules completely, where there's no common opponent or anything of that such. That's what they do in conference. When they're trying to decide coin flips games on who gets what, is common opponents and all that other stuff. And I'm totally for the strength of schedule. So, like I said, besides the point of if one team plays 9 conference games, but those 9 conference games, well, let's say 3 of them are tough games and 6 of them are cupcakes. And then you got the other team that plays 8 conference games, but they're playing 6 tough games and 3 cupcakes. Who has the tougher schedule? Huh? Who's going to have the tougher schedule? Because the team that has to play 6 ranked teams versus a team that has to play 3 ranked teams, who would you say has a stronger schedule? So it's not just throwing out there this arbitrary 8 versus 9 argument. It needs to be weighted with some other factors. Again, take case in point, like I said, more than probable, those SEC twos, including the top schools that other conferences teams be complaining about, that the SEC plays these weak non-conference schedules and all that other stuff. But yet, when you look at it in the totality of the schedule, when you see, okay, well, in their regular season, even though they play 8 games, they played 4 or 5 ranked teams. So that will mute and offset the 9-game conference argument if you sitting over there not playing one conference ranked team or no conference ranked team, as it were. So that's something that you need to think about in relation to this whole argument. And I know these folks know this, okay? They smart enough to know all this stuff that I'm saying. So this is nothing new on their plate. They just don't want to move the needle to that, for whatever reasons. But certainly that makes a lot of sense to do. To one, just play crossover games, start scheduling that. Now I know right now, because of all these teams they have in these preset schedules with games going into the 2030s, so that would be a challenge in some sense of it to do, but it's doable because they still have some games they can cancel off their schedule. And but like I said, at the end of the day, is how good is your team actually? You win the games that you have on your schedule, irregardless of anything else. You win your games on your schedule, you're highly likely to get in. Okay, if you dominate, you go 11-1, 10-2. That's a good foundation to getting in the playoffs. More than likely, any team out of these Power 4 conferences who has 10-2 record has a really good shot at getting in there. Okay, now where it starts to get tricky is them 3 loss games and who you lose to, how'd you lose them, and all that other stuff. So, but you're going to be at the back end though. If you're a 3-loss team, you're going to be at the back end. Don't expect yourself to be up there talking about, well, we deserve to be number 4, number 5 with 3 losses. Unless everybody else have a bag of 3 losses, no way, Jose. You need to win your games that you have and quit crying and all this other whine and stuff about what you think you deserve and all this, that, and the other. Because it's going to happen. Because a team that has lost 3 will say, well, we lost to 3 ranked teams. Okay? This other team, they're 11-1, but they didn't play not one ranked team. And that's a fair argument debate to have because, again, that's what you're evaluating, strength of schedule. So you're going to look at that. So it's not just automatically just to say, well, okay, if I won 11 games, that's the end all be all to it. It's going to factor in your strength of record and all these other things. And then, of course, they're going to be looking for any common opponent, okay, to be had. And so there is a move, and this is happening in the scheduling to where, it's contracting. So it's getting to that. As far as teams playing tougher, harder schedules. And it's very hard to just skate through a schedule without playing a ranked team at any point in the season and being challenged. But like I said, at the end of the day, you have the control of your schedule in your conference, especially your destiny to win those games, irregardless of anything else. You win your games, and that's your ticket. You're getting punched. You don't win your games, don't start crying about anything. I don't care who you are. Take your L for that season and then regroup and then come back the next season. Okay. Get this thing right. Now, like I said, that's one of the main things seem to be coming out of this Big Ten at the first day that we're hearing about. Playoff, because again, this was the big brouhaha that's been pretty much one of the major number one, number two talking points over the off season in college football, because they're up against the clock to set this agreement on how moving forward they're going to, what format they're going to use for the playoff and all this. And I'm always tempered when it comes to expansion of anything, because not all expansion is good expansion. And, like I said, if you just all about the money, then you just go ahead and just play, to let everybody in and just play it that way. Call it a day and just let everybody be in it, the darn thing, and then just have that be the thing. Because otherwise, like I said, set some criteria, just say, no, we want a strong playoff format. That's where you're going to have to win those games in your conference. And that does that. That keeps that playoff. That's like when you had two, it kept it strong. Even though you had arguments for the third or maybe fourth team, but you knew that the two teams that was going to be in there represented for the season the best of the best for what they did in the season. Okay. Now we all remember, if you were around back then, I know some of these youngsters out here, they got a short memory because they don't know the history too much. But early in the 2000s, and even going back before that, when you just had the AP polls and all that stuff, teams would lose their last game, right? And still get crowned a national champion. Or in the BCS era, where you had a situation where Oklahoma lost the game, but still was put in. Okay. And stuff. And so, but now, with this expansion, like I said, teams are on the clock to winning your games that you have scheduled in your conference. And that's your ticket to get to the playoff. Your conference schedule. And then, like I said, scheduling a non-conference Power 5. Quit skirting around this stuff. Now, again, I'm a college football guy, period. So even though I'm a little partial, I'm partial to the SEC. But at the same time, I just respect it. And so, but I love college football, so it don't matter what conference it is. But the point is this. I like seeing in these non-conference games, and this would be my wrap-up point, teams playing each other. Okay, I want to see power D1, FBS, whatever they call this stuff. I keep SBS, FBS, CBS, whatever the thing it is. I want to see those power conference teams play each other. If you're in the SEC, I want to play you playing the Big 10 or an ACC, and they do that. There's games this year where that is Alabama's playing Wisconsin, Texas playing Ohio State, as we all know. You have these big marquee games. LSU's playing Clemson. You have, crossover big power camera games all over the place. Okay, you have in the Big Ten, some, like I said, I just mentioned Ohio State. You have Michigan playing, who are they playing? Oklahoma. So you have some games out there. And those are the kind of games that we need to have consistently year in and year out. That was a tough thing that you would see every few years. You didn't see a lot of non-conference games as such, going back to the day. We kind of skipped over when it got to the 80s and everything, kind of skipped over up until when we got to the BCS era, late 90s. But from the early 70s and 80s, you had that because you wouldn't see, you would see like an Oklahoma playing USC games like that periodically. Okay, Alabama playing, USC Southern Cal. That was a big classic match and stuff like that. And then got to kind of away from that in the 80s and so forth. And then in the 90s, and like I said, through the introduction of the BCS, then that allowed for teams in that BCS playoff to play teams that you didn't necessarily play too much. There wasn't like a East Coast, West Coast type of deal. We didn't have too many matchups in the BCS era like that. For the most part, it wasn't none of that. It was just the two best teams and what have you. And some of them was in the same conference. Some of them was like the Big 10, SEC and ACC and all that stuff. And then with 4 team, it allowed more. Didn't get the quite as what we thought, because then the same thing happened where you had 2 teams out the same conference show up. And again, that's the same sort of thing that we've talked about with the current model of the 12 team. Is it going to be a repeat of that where you're going to have, at the end of the day, for the national championship, how many people will watch if the 2 teams in the national championship game are from the same conference? Then what? So it's always going to be an issue with something, because that's just the way it is. Okay. And us as college football fans who love this sport, we want to see the best teams play, period. I don't want to see no manufactured, we got to get this team in, because see, once you start creating this quota system, this is what we're trying to get out of, meritocracy, quit this quota stuff, because then you get quota, you got to fill that quota. Because, you're likely going to have a year where the teams that are there, if you have 2 teams, let's say one team is undefeated or one team had 1 loss, and then the rest of them have 2 and 3 and 4 losses. But you got to fill 2 slots. See? And then let's say a year that Ohio State lost 4 games, for example. Okay, or Oregon lost 4 games, or whoever. And they are the defending champs, right? But they end up losing like 3-4 games that next year. And then somebody's arguing, well, they should be in because we in the 14. And the thing is, they could have, like, that's the way the way it could play out is, like I said, they can have, let's say they have 1 loss in conference, 3 losses non-conference, or 2 losses in non-conference, 2 losses in conference. Okay, that might be a little better. So that's 4 losses, but they're finishing the conference though, even though they got 2 losses, is, let's say, 2nd place. So they're in the top tier of their conference with 2 losses, but they have 4 overall losses. So they deserve to get in there. Because you got a qualifier. You got 4 teams that had to get in there. See? And they get in with 4 losses. And then they add, and then based off what the Big Ten wants, I'm talking about, based off what the Big Ten wants. And then they're talking about this play-in weekend on on conference championship weekend. So even in that, but the team has already got 4 losses because that's an added game. That's not within the 9-game schedule. That's the added game. They're already going into that game, that play-in conference weekend game. They're going in there already with 4 losses, as I just gave a scenario to. They've lost 2 in the regular season of conference, and they lost their 2 out of conference games, but their record in conference places them second place. Okay. And then let's say that team, because again, like we had last year with Clemson upsetting SMU, then let's say they get into the championship game they're going to the championship game with 4 losses, beat the favorite team, which might have 0 losses or 1 loss. Beat that team. So now that's 4-loss team is the conference champion. Obviously, you're gonna put in the runner-up, who would be the favorite, and then you got to get 2 other ones. See? So, no. What I say is that it should matter with the regular season and what you do. Period. All this other stuff, play-in and charity, welfare stuff, leave that stuff alone. Okay? You earn your way in on your regular season, your conference, and what you do, and that's the end-all, be-all to it. And then you schedule, and then, like I said, if you choose to schedule weak opponents in your non-conference, then that's going to be on you because it's going to come back to bite you when they're stacking you up against another conference, because they're going to go by strength of record. They're going to say, look, you played 3 cupcake teams, that's 3 in 50 or whatever it is, right? And the other team played 2 ranked teams, lost 1, but they played 8 conference games. So we'll take that. All right, I'm going to stop here, and we will tune in with more wrap up for the Big Ten Media Days this week. I'll have some more stuff, like I said, as I'm getting prepared to do these continue my conference previews. I just did the Big Ten, as I mentioned earlier, and I can continue talking about the Big Ten mostly in this podcast here. But I'm going to be getting back into my previews next week. So stay tuned for that. I got the SEC coming up. I have the Mountain West, the Big 12, the ACC, and the rest of them. Pac-12 even. So we'll look at that. And then I'll before the season start, I'll give you my top 25. Of course, the top 25 probably be out sometime next week, I'm assuming, or somewhere around there. It usually comes out around August 1st or so. Which is only, again, it just gets us ramped up and all that other stuff, so as everybody knows. But I'm going to have my own little top 25 coming up for you as well, too. All right, we'll check back with you. Thank you for tuning in, and don't forget to share and like the button, and we'll talk with you soon next time here on College Sports and More with Rashad B. in the house.